Hello and welcome everyone. This is our Industry 4.0 Club here on LinkedIn Live, and this is our Thursday live stream on people, process, and culture. And today we have the conclusion of our Autism in Manufacturing series that's been led here with Jason. We had some great conversation with various people that are doing some initiatives in this area. But here today at this conclusion, we have a panel of some great individuals here that actually lives with autism and are in our space and have some good experiences and some guidance and some solutions that we're going to talk about. So we're really interested here. What we've heard about somebody from the outside trying to create an environment or create opportunities or create learning scenarios for people with autism and other what we call the invisible what do you call it visible areas that no, not everybody can see. Yeah, but now we're actually talking to people that are in this area, and they have had some experiences for themselves, both for a period of time, maybe especially in Jason's scenario, not knowing what was going on, and I don't know exactly everybody else's history here, but that's what we're going to get into, and we're really looking forward to having this conversation. We'll start with a quick introduction, all of us here, and then we'll go into the conversation. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them into the chat. We'll try to bring them into the conversation and have either one here that the question is directed to answer the question or comment to a comment, etc. Um, and again, if you like having these type of conversations as much as we do, please join our scheduled rooms. We have them every day in the week from Monday through Thursday at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Monday through Thursday with various topics around Industry 4.0. We have Women in Manufacturing on Mondays. We have technology on Tuesdays. We have Fireside Chat on Wednesdays. And then here on a Thursday, we have People, Process, and Culture. Thank you everyone for being here. We love having you guys come back and add to our conversation, and hope and encourage you guys to continue and join us here on Industry 4.0 Club. A quick introduction on myself. When I'm not here with these amazing people on Industry 4.0 Club, my daily job is I am a product leader for digital solutions at Ingersoll Rand, where we are utilizing IoT to make our equipment smart and connected. Jason, on to you.
Thanks, Jan. I'm Jason, and when I'm not involved with the Industry 4 Club, my day job is the IoT market specialist for Pepperl & Fuchs. Like Jan said, this is the final episode in our autism series, and we pulled together a panel of people from the industry, and this is a neurodivergent panel. So we're not all autistic, but we do all have a neurodivergent diagnosis. For myself, I was diagnosed with Asperger's, or what is known as level 1 autism. And as with most people with autism, I also have some co-diagnoses along with that, including PTSD, clinical depression, and ADHD. And I also I didn't meet the requirements for dyslexia, but I do suffer with difficulties in understanding written words, so I have to rely fairly heavily on speech to text and text to speech software if the text I'm reading is generally more than about a paragraph. So today we are joined by Zach Scriven, Justin Sherman, and Todd Ellis. I will toss it based on my screen on who's to my right, which is Zach, to quickly introduce himself. So
Thank
Zach,
you,
over to you.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here, honestly. No, obviously being here, many people, I think I've shared this a couple times in the past, but I'm on the spectrum, you know, identify like having Asperger's. I never was like formally diagnosed growing up. And I think my parents kind of did me a little bit of a disservice, like trying to withhold that knowledge from me that I was different. And so I didn't really learn effective like coping mechanisms until I was like older and learned that I had, you know, I was on the spectrum. So you know, I was always like, why is it so hard for me to make friends and, you know, not be able to pick up on social cues and things of that nature? And it's very frustrating growing up. But yeah, it's also like affects ability to maintain jobs and navigate the work environment. So, but yeah, it's honestly, it's cool to be here. Thank you. I really like what you're doing with your initiative, Jason. So it's, you know, I'm happy to support it in any way that I can. So
next, we'll move to Justin.
Hi, y'all. I'm Justin Sherman. I've been in manufacturing since 2009. A wide variety of roles, starting as a machinist and, you know, working my way through inspection, programming, eventually management. Lately, my professional life has looked like consulting for like trades education programs and doing like speaking at various events. My background, neurodivergence, is autism, which I found out later in life as well. After having a child that got diagnosed with autism and learning so much more about it. Also ADHD, history, sort of ebbing and flowing of PTSD, depression, and anxiety. And professionally, like I'd say, you know, the biggest challenge I end up finding is when I get into a new environment, I feel like entirely overwhelmed by all of the new stuff to figure out for the first little while. And coping during that time can be a bit of a challenge. And then typically it's like about a 2-month process of feeling that way before I really start feeling settled. But once I get there, then I'm like really on. You know? Yeah, we'll kick over to our last person, Todd.
Hey, thanks. Can you hear me good?
Okay. Yep, we can hear you.
Mute is an enemy of mine. Yeah, thank you for everybody for sharing of yourselves and for sharing this space. I think it's a really cool thing to investigate and fill with all the already different people here. I think that's pretty cool. So my name is Todd Ellis. I am a white male with white glasses and headphones on for those who may not be able to see. I work at Microsoft. I've been there for 20 years. I'm here to speak about my own experience, not so much to speak to Microsoft or its policies or things like that. I just like to get that out of the way. I've lived with ADHD and undiagnosed dyslexia and have since I was age 8. Well, that's when I was diagnosed. So I've been living with the stigma, I guess, around that for a very long time. The work I do at Microsoft is in engineering. So I'm a service engineer for Azure, so the cloud in basic terms. And I am a huge advocate for everything disability related, especially neurodivergence, after a set of experiences unfolded for me at work. And so now I freely share of my experience and perspective with people like this, and basically anywhere I can to be effective. So thank you for having me.
All right, so let's if for the people in the audience watching, this is we're trying to run this as a open discussion panel, so please feel free to drop questions in the chat and we will answer them to the best of our abilities. But to start this off, what would you guys each say is the biggest challenge you face within the workplace? Hey, who wants to go first?
I want to start.
I'll go for it. I don't know about if it's the biggest challenge, but it's sizable. Is just being open and disclosing. That's a huge thing in that, and just being able to navigate with people all the different nuances of the best way I work and how I can work best with them and things like that. But it's just, I think the open communication and the conversation is probably the hardest thing that just keeps popping up everywhere you go. Somebody mentioned when you move, every time you move, you have to take the story with you. It's very difficult to have to keep exposing yourself in that way a lot. But yeah, what do you guys go?
Yeah, that was kind of the first thing that came to mind for me when I was thinking about biggest challenges. You know, like lots of bigger companies have this like self-disclosure piece when it comes to, you know, your application process, because they want to hit certain targets for disabled folks that they hire, right? But that doesn't necessarily translate to how open of a culture they might have, or how, you know, easy it might be to have that conversation when you get into a new job, particularly with, you know, an industry that's sort of like traditionally conservative as manufacturing. It can feel really challenging to say like, hey, you know, I have, you know, autism or ADHD, and here are the things that, you know, can kind of like help me out with that, because there can be this feeling that there's going to be a lot of stigma projected upon you. And at times there is, you know, and so self-disclosure can feel like a really risky piece. And so I think, you know, one of the biggest tips for employers is to try to develop a really open and supportive culture around these things, so folks can self-disclose and be properly supported, because that translates into better work performance, and really sort of like taking advantage of various folks' strengths too, if they, you know, feel like they can kind of work well in those spaces. But that takes a lot of like, right from the sort of like get-go, displaying the fact that your culture is open and making sure to like work within your staff to, you know, develop awareness and knowledge around these things.
Zach, anything to add to that? Or
Yeah, for me, it's like, it was always for better or for worse, always like questioning the way we were doing things, even like to superior. Like I was always like, why are we using this piece of software? Why aren't we doing it that way? Like never really just kind of fitting into the mold, so to speak. I wasn't happy unless I was like innovating or changing the way that we were doing things, or at least questioning the way that we were doing things. So that was one piece. You know, I think like when I was growing up, my friends would call me like savant, you know, because like in some sense I was like naturally very gifted, like in the hard sciences, like physics or math. But in other sense, they're like, you know, you like try talking to a girl and I'll like, you know, fall flat on my face and like make a fool of myself, you know. So it's like, you know, that dichotomy was like kind of part of my personality. So that was kind of encapsulated. I'm not an actual savant, but you know, that sort of made sense that I was like kind of gifted. So naturally being a programmer, industrial automation, PLC programming, I was pretty gifted at. But, you know, one of the things that sort of, I never really told my employers, like I was mostly kind of self-employed working for my parents' business when I was starting at a young age. But then when I kind of went into work for other employers in the space, I never really said, hey, I have autism. Like, that's why I'm different. maybe I should have, but I don't think I was really kind of self-aware of it entirely at that point. You know, this was 6-7 years ago. So, but, yeah, like, I would have like I would get always docked in professionalism. Like they're like, hey, you're not professional. And it's like, well, I'm just very honest, you know? So not understanding the social norms of how to navigate like politics and things like that, or office culture. And then the other thing was like, my boss said one time, or, you know, my manager was like, you know, you like mess around, or like you'll be like screwing around, like talking or like walking around the office, not really being productive for like 3 or 4 hours. And then in like an hour, you'll get like a day's worth of work done. And so like my work schedule was never really like consistent or steady. It would just sort of be like, you know, very bursts of productivity where I'd get like a lot of things done. And then I would sort of like, you know, socialize or like, you know, so that was kind of the other thing is, you know, I didn't really have like a typical work and that was also because like the diagnosis with ADHD and whatnot. So that's kind of how it manifested itself in my workspace. So
Yeah, I heard that.
I can second a lot of what has been said. So, one of the biggest challenges I think I've seen really is that openness and receptiveness in the workplace. Like Justin said, we are in traditionally a fairly conservative industry. You know, so the receptiveness, you know, you don't always feel safe in disclosing. I know personally for myself, part of the reason why I don't feel safe in disclosing is the amount of bullying and pushback I received throughout my life. Like, you know, if I showed as different, and a lot of people within the spectrum will do what is called masking, is where they'll hide their autistic traits and try to imitate what they see as a neurotypical behavior to avoid themselves from being singled out, because there are far too many people on the autism spectrum that faced a great deal of discrimination and bullying growing up, because they were always that kid that stood out. And I learned very early that having a hyper focus on an interest made me a target to the bullies in the school. You know, so throughout my life, you know, I've been beaten with a baseball bat, I've been beaten with a 2x4, I've been beaten with a piece of angle iron on a work site, I've been held down and burned just because I stood out as different. So I learned to hide what made me different and to avoid people early. So I was very much early in my career a loner from the other coworkers, because I always feared, you know, the reaction of other people. And it wasn't until I got diagnosed at the age of 37 and I started to understand what was going on, and I started to realize that I shouldn't have to hide what it was that made me different, and I should openly talk about it at work. But it's still very difficult to talk about at work, because there is this perception within the society that, you know, presenting as different is bad. And a lot of employers really don't do a good job of creating that open environment where you can feel comfortable in disclosing. And as Zach mentioned, you know, people generally on the autism spectrum, because they're capable of this hyper focus, when they do get hyper focused, they can actually produce quite a bit of material in a short period of time. I was doing research on the internet, and there was a few studies I came across out of, I believe it was Australia, that said that if you can get an autistic employee and line up their task with their interests and their hyper focus, what they generally accomplish within 6 hours on an average, as they found, was equivalent to what most people would accomplish in about 8. So there are like those different things.
So that's interesting. So one of the things I heard, and thanks for sharing, all of you, is what I haven't heard before is like the PTSD perspective and the depression perspective, and I'm assuming here that that's, for some of you at least, that's based on the history of how you experienced growing up into this and getting into the workplace into this, and what you got back from it. I'm assuming here, but when you say that employers are not good yet at least to and not all, there's some that are, I'm sure, as we've heard in some of the earlier sessions, but generally it's still a hurdle. But are you seeing, all of you, are you seeing it improving? Because what I'm seeing from the outside is, in general, that companies on the DEI, you know, diversity, inclusion, all this kind of stuff, not necessarily in this area, but in all other areas, they are doing a lot of work right now, and they're really trying to stand out. Every single larger company standing out with their efforts, etc. So I seeing that on your area, it's also improving, or is that still just not considered yet?
I'd say for larger companies, yes, or more like tech progressive kind of companies, you know, and like in the industry 4.0 space, I think I see, you know, a lot more space for things. But in like medium to small size companies, I don't feel like I've personally seen as much progress there. But progress is being made, absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Obviously, I'm in a huge industry and for a huge company as well. So I think some of the things that we do, some people see it as kind of leading the way, but I think that there's so much work that we don't get right. But I do see an overall tick. I think if there's one thing that's been kind of a silver lining of this entire pandemic, it's the awareness around neurodivergence, the awareness around mental health, and kind of the, I don't know if it's normalization is the right word, but maybe a disarming of people to be able to talk about it. And I've seen a huge uptick in that, which then I believe leads to, breaking the stigma, people looking at it a little bit more objectively and saying, what's this about? Why do I feel this way about it? But I think we're trending in a positive direction, but I hope it's not just a trend.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It is becoming better. There's still a very long way to go. There are really not a lot of companies that are bringing neurodivergent into their conversations yet. It has definitely improved over the 20 plus years I've been in the industry, but there's still a lot further we've got to go.
I think some of that's kind of just to the hidden aspect of all of this too, right? Like I'd say the vast majority of folks are not self-disclosing at the workplace, for a variety of reasons. And so I think as more of us start doing so, then there'll be more examples, and we can start, I guess, having these conversations a little bit more frequently, and maybe making some help pushing progress ourselves too. But of course, that comes with the inherent risk that surrounds self-disclosure. So it's kind of tough, but I think we'll keep moving the needle. And this is one thing that should hopefully help a lot, right? Is putting these conversations into the public space and getting people thinking about these things.
Yeah, we had one of the first episodes was with Microsoft, and they had started also I don't know if it's nonprofit or whatever, but there was several companies together had started kind of like a website and starting to kind of have like informational sharing on it. And I know this would not be something you would come and give to an employer but at your interview, but it could be something at the time that if there was those type of resources available, that once you are in and you disclose and say, by the way, here's some good resources that kind of, first of all, tells a little bit about how I would be in an environment and what to consider and what to think about. And also one of the other calls we had, I can't remember her name right now, but she was saying, if you're a large company, the percentage of people on a spectrum or with some neurodiverse disorder is not small. And so if you have 100 people, 200 people, 300 people in your organization, there are definitely some here that if they're not disclosing it, they're still there, right? And if you start opening up and say, hey, we're gonna start thinking about this, we're gonna start doing something about it, then that would get others to also disclose and potentially, I would hope at least, get a better work environment, right?
I want to mention what Christina was saying about being direct and aggressive. There's two things that I always run into issues with. One is like being on the spectrum, we can kind of see things. Tend to be, I mean, this is just my own experience, but like I tend to be very logical. Like I tend to be in my logical brain a lot. So we can kind of come across as like lacking empathy. But we're like kind of always in it. We see things as I see things as like kind of very binary. So I'm always kind of looking in this relentless search of truth. Like I'm not trying to necessarily argue with someone. I'm trying to like get down to what is the truth. And sometimes we can kind of, without realizing it, I mean, at least I can come across as like condescending when I'm not really meaning to come across that way. So that's like one thing. And then the lacking empathy, like we kind of, but I think we do have an emotional side too, but for me at least, it's kind of compartmentalized, and so I kind of have to pull myself into that headspace to really get into my emotions and stuff. So, but yeah, I think one way to combat that, like a tip a hack is maybe try, and it's hard because like I'm trying to like get into it, but like if you try maybe the Socratic method, like asking questions, kind of helping that person come to that realization on their own rather than be like, oh no, like you're wrong.
Right.
And here's why.
Yeah. So I think that might help. Yeah. I don't know. You guys have any notes on that or experiences?
I mean, empathy skills I've learned can be learned for sure, but when it comes to direct not equaling aggressive, I think this is another one of those times where it's like, you know, self-disclosure can really help. Lots of work cultures I've found, particularly at bigger organizations, kind of like the politics surrounding things are like very passive aggressive, which is not the sort of like traditional autistic approach to anything. And so it can be sort of very confusing for folks like us, but also folks that are, you know, used to operating in that, you know, passive aggressive, read between the lines, you know, what I'm saying isn't what I'm meaning kind of stuff. And if there is some knowing about, you know, hey, I'm a person on the spectrum and this is how it's going to be, then, you know, that sort of more direct communication won't necessarily be read as like having a lot of aggression on the like underneath it. But yeah, that's sort of a tough one because you're always going to end up running into people that are going to read it that way regardless. But I do feel like helping people along or just communicating that, you know, even if you're not like ready to self-disclose, maybe you just say like, hey, you know, this is just sort of like my communication method, and when I say this or I say something in this kind of way, like this is what it means. If you pick up on that, you know, somebody might be feeling uncomfortable about a way that, you know, you're speaking to them. And then also, you know, Zach made a really great suggestion around, you know, the Socratic method. I mean, asking questions rather than, you know, directly telling, because nobody wants to be told that they're wrong. But, you know, it's a little bit easier to get somebody there if, you know, you kind of help them come to that realization that there's, you know, an idea that might be a little bit more effective. Wrong isn't necessarily the right answer for anything, right? But
Right.
It's different.
Different, yeah. I think we should take some time to talk about strengths, like things that, you know, areas where we found ourselves excelling in, and that, you know, other folks with, you know, say like ADHD or autism might excel as well. I can go first.
Go for it.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, you know, Zach was mentioning earlier some challenges surrounding ADHD, right? Like very sort of like fragmented work schedule that involved like a bunch of different things, but then a period of hyper focus that was extremely productive. Some of my most productive experiences or roles have been roles in which I had to wear like a lot of different hats. So I worked as for a few years as a scientific instrument maker, and that was a like prototyping role that involved a lot of like process and design and manufacturing on various pieces of equipment. And so I really excelled at just like bouncing around, doing all these different things, right? Like be on one task for an hour and then move on to the next and the next and the next, and all of them very much aligned with my interests. And so it was like a period of, you know, hyper focus almost like all day long. And so if you know somebody's on the spectrum, or not necessarily on the spectrum, but rather ADHD, you can really put them into a role that requires a lot of variety, and that will work really well, and maybe pull away from some of that like need to kind of drift and socialize, though that can always be kind of fun too, and doesn't necessarily hurt as much as some folks might think, right? Because I think everybody, not just folks like us, have those periods of like, all right, these like peak periods where they can get a lot done, but they need to kind of like be on for that. And sometimes that process looks a little like, you know, getting comfortable in the space and kind of like, you know, going through some of those like small periods of socialization, and then they can be on and get a whole lot done. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody's really the type that can like have a consistent amount of focus for 8 hours, you know. That sounds, kind of exhausting and impractical, really. I mean, that's, where lots of folks are finding like, oh, these like shorter work days help, or 4 on 3 off and stuff like that, where people end up having a lot more ability to get things done as opposed to being expected to be focused for such a long period of time. And then the other thing that's been a major strength for me, and I think sort of fits along the lines for most folks that are on the spectrum, is like a really high degree of like pattern sensitivity and ability to recognize patterns. And when you're thinking about manufacturing, there's a lot. Like, I mean, everything really follows some sort of specific process or pattern, and any deviance I would always catch on right away. Or even just in like the process planning aspect of things, I could just like almost notice right away where the hole was, and like bring that up. And then became the challenge of sort of like convincing others that hey, there was going to be this problem that we'd run into. And early in my career, I'd run into situations where I couldn't get folks to listen to me until they would eventually like notice that I was consistent enough, and then they'd start trusting me, and then I could start taking things over and increasing productivity and changing processes around. And it helped a lot. And I think Zach mentioned earlier, like this sort of compulsive need to feel like we're innovating and making these things better, and sometimes bringing up like why are we doing this, I mean, those questions being asked can help a lot. And if somebody has a particular strength around like pattern recognition and sensitivity and being able to sort of like put these different things together and recognize the holes, like don't ignore those suggestions. Try them out, see how it works, particularly if the investment floor is relatively low and you can sort of stomach the risk to try something out. I mean, I remember spending months early in my career trying to convince my employer to like take on what would have been a $5,000 software upgrade. And once we finally did, I was able to start utilizing like high-speed machining techniques on all of our old equipment, and actually started like changing processes around where some of our legacy part lines I started making 3 times faster than the processes that we had been using to make them previously. And that was something that I was able to sort of like pick up on. And I became sort of like very rigid in my position on it, but I drove. And eventually we got there, and then everybody got to see like, oh, wow, yeah, this is really working. Like, yeah, I know. I wish we would have done it sooner, and we should do this other thing too, right? And so, yeah, if somebody that's on your team is on the spectrum and they have a particular skill around pattern recognition, like take advantage of it, put them in a process-oriented role, and they will really excel.
Can I ask you a question about that, Justin? Did you find that? I have 2 questions actually. How did you follow some methodology to figure out what your interests were, and then get you into the industry where you knew those existed? So I'll just go one at a time because I would forget myself.
No, to be frank, I've kind of fell into industry. I spent quite a while just trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and having kind of quite a bit of life chaos like early on. And then a job in manufacturing, like an opportunity in manufacturing, presented itself to be sort of like an informal apprentice through the family of my ex-wife. And I was like, okay, I'll try it out. And then I got in, and I was like, oh my God, I love all of this. This is also perfect, right? Because I was always kind of like, nerdy and tech oriented. And I came from, an environment with like folks that really like to make things. And, but I never felt like I had any particular skill in, like say like wrenching and stuff. Like back then, it wasn't a space that I felt confident in. But then when I found myself in this like space that kind of like mixed them both, I don't know. It just fell in for me, and it very much became a passion very quickly.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. You had another question too.
I did. when you thanks for reminding me. When you talk about, you touched on like, I have to keep telling these people, I have to keep this laser focus to carry kind of the benefit and prove the benefit to other people, right? I find a lot of times I have a very hard time articulating like what it is that's in my head and why is that useful? So it's kind of the sales in the same way. In similar vein, I wonder if there's like tools or tactics, or is it just keep pushing and pushing until they finally realize?
I mean, some of it was keep pushing, right? But this was like 10, 11 years ago. And I've certainly like changed and grown a lot as a person in the meantime, and learned a lot of new skills when it comes to communicating that would certainly make it easier for me now to get there. But there's not, I don't think, a quick path, particularly if you're sort of like new into a role. Like some of it just comes down to building trust within the team, to get them to be more receptive. If you're in a mid or more senior position, maybe you have that room, and then just being sort of like stubborn and kind of driving it until you get there can be helpful. But it's really very much kind of a context based kind of thing, so if you have the space to have the conversations, definitely do push. Sometimes I've definitely found myself in situations where I took the approach of like, beg for forgiveness later kind of thing, and just do the thing, and then make it so people will see the benefit sort of like immediately. And then if I get in trouble for it, I'd get in trouble for it. But I knew I had the sort of room to take that risk at the time.
Right. Good points.
Is the issue or the scenario maybe? I have a little bit of that pattern recognition as well. Sometimes I feel, and my wife is exactly the opposite, and so she will say, "I will go with facts and numbers, and then I will convince anybody if I can show the numbers and the facts. Here you go, they'll go with it, right?" But if you're that pattern recognition person, it's harder to go the opposite backwards to say, "Well, I can see right away, but no, maybe I can't actually explain it, but I can see that pattern. It's going to go that way." But going back again and trying to find here are the numbers and the facts on it. Is that where the kind of the gap sometimes is, that is harder to go back and bring that to the table as opposed to what's right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes with things that you might come up with, there might not be any data yet to rely on, and you might know, like through sort of like path of logic, that it's going to end up a certain way, but you can't necessarily say like, here's the facts and data. And so you can break the logic down and try to present it that way. But sometimes I found myself in situations where it's like, all right, like this person isn't, necessarily, like they wouldn't necessarily disagree, but they have, there's some other reason that they're resistant. There could be some certain emotional attachment to a thing, or whatever. And sort of trying to like discover what is the intrinsic motivator or inhibitor for a specific person can be a help. And that's where sort of like exercising some of those like empathy skills that might not be inherent can come into play. But yeah, I found in spaces where it's like, all right, there's no data. If I break down the logic and it's like, okay, here's sort of the path, and here's where I see the hole and why I see that being the case, or here's like a solution that we can implement. And while I can't say that it's going to work out with provide all of the hard data, I can say here's how it'll start trending if we make this change, or what have you. And but again, very context specific. So
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry if my questions derailed us completely. I'm really good at that.
No, not at all.
Oh, that's fine. Zach, do you have anything to add to this, or?
Yeah, on the leaning into your skill set side, like for me, I started out in being a programmer, being a system integrator, senior system integrator, and then in 2018 I kind of quit that to do marketing. And for me, like leaning into that creative side of my brain, like it really paid off. Like and like the ADHD aspect, like there was always something new. Like social media is like this constant like hamster wheel. There's always like a new thing to comment on, or a new trend to hop on, or so like that sort of worked for me. I still, like when I was running my agency, like I didn't know a lot about running businesses. So like my agency itself wasn't all that successful, but the work that I put into building, content around the industrial automation space, a lot of that like client success was like, Walker Reynolds and what we did at Intellic Integration. And then that turned into like 4.0 solutions and the online university that we sort of created. A lot of that like was like my brainchild, like, and me just sort of working towards creating something new and Walker would always say like, hey, Zach, he'll like not be afraid to try new things because he's not afraid of like how people may perceive that. Or so for like, it sounds weird, but like, yeah, I think if you're on the spectrum, like consider going into marketing or, even like selling, like that was a skill I always thought it was like, I honestly thought sales was like bullshit. I thought it was like, I thought it was just like you just tricking the other person. Like once I really opened my mind to sales, my income really like went up a lot, so it's like, rather than saying, hey, like sales is bullshit and I could never be good at selling, it's like, hey, let me at least learn how to sell in my own way, right? Like discover, like learn different sales techniques and learn what works for you. But yeah, like don't just like, it's kind of a stereotype, like if you're on the spectrum you're just going to be like an engineer, but like if you learn marketing or sales, you can kind of be a more well-rounded individual.
Yeah, I think that could be like personally just something that's very helpful for folks. So yeah, round them out.
I better look at sales because I feel that way about sales all the time.
It's a crazy, it kind of flipped my mind. It ended up, because in some sense, when someone without the sale, there's no project for the engineer to even work on. So I had it all backwards. I thought the engineer drove the world, but it's actually the sales that drives the world. And I was like, holy shit, so that kind of humbled myself, and since then, like, I like my agency, like I said, in 2018, 19, 20, like sort of didn't really work out because of what the lacking experience that I had about just being a well-rounded business, knowing a lot about how to run a business, how to run it profitably. A lot of that, like I've learned in the last few years, so now I started a new business and I'm actually running it profitably and successfully. So it's like, I had to learn those experiences kind of the hard way, just through failure, but yeah, like that's it's sort of those soft skills like that, kind of, I guess, maybe get undervalued by people that are in the hard skills, or the the engineers that we kind of scoff at sales and marketing, but it's really legit.
I might go check it out.
Yeah, I can pretty much kind of second that, right? Because early in my career, most of my stuff was on the engineering and the programming side. And it wasn't until I moved into a technical specialist and sales type role that I really started to understand and adapt, and was able to adapt my social skills within the work field. And I think moving into those roles really actually made me a more effective employee, because it forced me to face the things that challenged me and that I was afraid to face, saying, I'll never be able to do that because I don't understand people. But honestly, within the automation space, the guys in manufacturing, the people you're dealing with, they want somebody that can talk on the technical and see that process, right? They don't want you to see just that problem that's in front of them right then. They want you to be able to see how that problem applies across their entire process, so you can help them come up with the appropriate solution. So I would fully encourage anybody that's in the automation or tech that is neurodivergent, take a swing at stepping outside your comfort zone and go into a outside sales or technical style support. You'll see that a lot of your skills you have really fit really nicely in there.
Absolutely. I want to like third or however many that too. It just, like, any neurodivergent folks out there, like, I know none of us like being put into a box, and we shouldn't put ourselves into a box also, right? Like, step outside of it, challenge yourself. That's where a lot of growth occurs. I mean, that's where all growth occurs. Lisa asked a question earlier about, me mentioning that when I get into a new job that I feel overwhelmed, right? And that's always been the case. And, how do I manage this? It's honestly just been all right, I have to learn to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I just have to I have to do that, because it's going to happen. And if I sort of withdraw myself and only go into spaces in which I feel comfortable, I'm not going to be able to kind of grow, and I'm only just going to exist in a world that feels safe, but it's going to be really confining, right? And so I just would deal with it, frankly. I didn't really feel like I had much choice other than to do that. And I'm also a parent, and so the risks kind of attached to losing my job or income kind of like kept driving me forward anyhow. I didn't feel like I had the opportunity to fail, and so I pushed myself to make sure that I didn't. But yeah, I would just dive in and start doing things and just know that I was going to be uncomfortable, and just try to do my best, sort of practicing self-care outside of work, and just relying on my masking skills while I was in work, in the early times, to just sort of like get me through. And yeah, I would be exhausted by the end of the day, but I knew eventually it would level out, and it always would. And yeah, and I don't know, I guess I'm grateful for taking that approach, but if that's something that you're worried about, just try to adopt that philosophy of just getting comfortable being uncomfortable, and know that that's where the space of growth is, and that it's only temporary. It doesn't last forever. Right?
Yeah, just mention we got a lot of great comments on the chat here. Great support, and then I just highlighted Lisa's question as well, which you answered. But I mean, that interests a lot of people, not just because they themselves might be on the spectrum or have family, etc. But it's one of the things that I got from this entire series too is that it's not just for people on the spectrum; it is for everybody. I heard from Microsoft saying that once they get the training, they improve their entire team. And we also heard that some of the manufacturers that are starting to learn about this, once they bring it into their environment, they get so much positive back from everybody, seeing that they're actually doing something about it, that it helps everybody as well. So this is a great topic and great conversation. Let me see if there's any other questions we want to bring in here.
I liked Taylor Kendall's comment about neurodivergent folks tend to hate or not be good at subterfuge and unspoken communications, whether that's in a romantic partner or in the workplace or in politics.
Yeah.
If I had like $1 for however many times that got me in trouble for my relationships, I wouldn't have to work anymore, Yeah. That'd be my full-time job.
Yeah. That's cool.
Todd, is there anything you want to add around the strengths for, that people with either ADHD or dyslexia tend to bring, since, you do bring a bit of a different perspective than the rest of us?
Yeah, sure. I think that strengths should be the focus of everything we do, right? Like it's very hard to know what your strengths are and to go dive in to find them. But I think once you do, and you are able to pair that with the work that hopefully you do for a living, I think that's where people will flourish the most. But as far as like strengths that I have, like pattern recognition, you said that. I have like a deep justice sensitivity. So if something seems unjust to me, I'll add extra power to it and just go figure it out, or ask a whole bunch of uncomfortable questions to get people thinking. I do that a lot. I've been actually smacked around for it, but I enjoy it. So I think it's fun. And then like the hyper focus, if I find something that's deeply interesting to my mind, like I'll just, how it goes. Like it could be hours, it could be days. My wife will come home and I'll have forgotten to eat, or didn't let the dogs out. And I'm just like, oh, well, I had this problem to figure out. She doesn't get it, but everybody else probably listening to this totally understands. So I think that if you compare those with the work that you do, or the things that you find meaningful, I think, like I said, I think that's where you can do your best work. But it's hard to find sometimes.
Yeah, hearing everyone's experience and story here, I mean, I think to Justin's point, not put anybody in a box here, because there's all kinds of different opportunities, and you got to learn your own strengths and your own opportunities, and go try it out. Exactly. Because I think that's where some of it might be a little bit of a problem in some of these smaller manufacturers, is that they put this whole thing in a box without knowing anything about it. And so the more we can spread this kind of information, the more we can talk about it, and the more resources that are available for anybody to learn about it, the better. And I think I've been almost emotionally kind of positive from this whole experience, just to see all the things that's going on out there, of people trying to start some initiatives that are driving, either on a local level or on a national level, something to get more openness about this, understanding about this, and knowledge about it. And then, because it's not just one in 10,000 or something like that. Every single medium-sized companies will have employees that could get some help by being acknowledged in a different way, so that they're better understanding of why they excel in some ways, and why they may maybe have some trouble with some of the personal skills, etc. And it's not, as soon as you know, then it's not bad, right? It's not, as soon as you just know why. Okay, I got it. Fine, and it's so then you can work together. You can accomplish so much more together, right? So, and it almost breaks my heart listening to you, Jason, on you like growing up, right, being different, and all this stuff that happened to you. And I hope that's a singular story and not necessarily the standard. And I hope that we all get more and more openness about it, so that's not the case, right?
I was that kid that, I never played with my toys. I took them apart. I was more interested in what made them work than actually playing with them. I tore apart the TV because I was more interested in how the TV functioned than actually what it provided. And that's quite common for people on the spectrum, is they generally don't interact with their toys as kids the way you would normally expect a kid to interact. It can present in several different ways. I remember my first remote control vehicle. I tore it apart to see if I could take the insides and the electronics and make a remote control plane out of it. I tore, my family basically stopped giving me toys that I could take apart.
Or fun little kits you can make something new with.
Well, I think when I was growing up, pretty about the only thing we had was Lego. So,
and that's made to be torn apart.
And that's made to be torn apart. Yeah. But it's not like the Lego Mindstorm sets now, where you can actually make stuff and little robots and move. I think as a kid, I would have spent days on that thing without eating or sleeping.
Yeah, it's a good one. I learned a lot in the process.
I see there's a question in the comments. It's Lisa. It says, do you fear other people will find out what your weaknesses are and or assume biases based upon a strength or weakness? It's an interesting topic, and it's one that we talk about a lot too in these communities. But the imposter syndrome, even when we started, somebody was saying in the intro, it's the show is, I think, initially maybe for autistic audiences or had autistic people on it, and I was thinking to myself, oh man, I don't fit in here. I'm gonna have to tell everybody that don't have autism. So I always think that always there's some kind of weird thing sitting on my shoulder, wondering if people are going to figure out where my weaknesses lie. But one thing that I've done to overcome that is I just have learned to just be open with everything about it, and then it kind of diffuses the situation ahead of time. So I think somebody was talking about bullying earlier in life, and definitely that was the case, right? Like once people realize that you're different than them, then it begins to spark like all kinds of different things that could happen in your life. But I think that if you're open about it, then people don't really have that ammo, I guess it is. So yeah, I'm always I always used to be worried about what people thought and what my weaknesses are, but once I realized that these are my weaknesses and instead I choose to focus on my strengths, then I really don't care what people think about my weaknesses. So good question though. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, learning to not be in a position where you're fearing that or care is, there's definitely a lot of power to be had in that. I do still at times fear self-disclosure, not nearly as much as I used to. Now I'm very open about it, sort of like generally, but there's always in the back of my mind is like, all right, how is this person going to perceive what I tell them, right? If I tell them that I'm on the spectrum, what understanding of that are they now going to project upon me? And if a person's in sort of a position to have like a certain amount of control over, what I get to do, that can be sort of like scary, because then the worry is that they're going to put me into some box because of what their presumptions about autism are or something, right? Be like, oh, I hear that people with autism aren't good with people, so I'll make sure I put this person into an IC role or not let them touch any sort of like supervisory or management position, right? That's always like something that's like a worry, which is like, there's no truth to that, right? There can certainly be some challenges when it comes to learning the skills necessary to socialize and things like that, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be a bad person in a supervisory or management position. In fact, those are areas that I found myself excelling in quite a lot. But yeah, I think it does come down to just, what, like Todd's approach, just be open about it. And by example, you can still start helping break down people's, presumptions about things. I mean, I guess, I do that somewhat regularly, where it's like, okay, I don't look like most people's sort of like stereotypical presumptions about a person with autism, and so I think that helps kind of expand their thoughts about what that can look like. The same it ends up being true for my son, who, early on in life, we had so many different struggles, but got him into what do they call it? There's like a social skills classes and stuff. And, he's 13 now. And when he tells people that he's autistic, they're like, oh, I just thought you were like a hyper and weird kid. I didn't realize, because like, oh, you haven't said a single mean thing to me or something, like, oh gosh. Yeah. It's like, so he's come to me and be like, yeah, people think it's something different. I'm like, yeah, just keep telling people, but that'll help, Yeah.
If you want to know why people on the spectrum should be in manufacturing, I mean, just look at Elon Musk. Without Elon Musk, he went on Saturday Night Live and said he was one of the first people or the first person with Asperger's, to host Saturday Night Live, or at least the first person to say so. So he sort of self advocated there, which was, I think, a step in the right direction. But I mean, he's proven to be an effective leader, and like, obviously all the stuff that's going on with Twitter and his lack of like maybe social awareness there might be hurting him a little bit. But in general, I think, if you want to see why people on the spectrum should be in manufacturing, just look at Tesla and Elon Musk, and there you go. So I love what you're doing, Jason, and I'm really stoked that you brought me on the panel today. And if we can all make a little impact, we can make the world a better place. So
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
So we're
getting
the main purpose of this was, the only way we're going to break this barrier in manufacturing is we got to start having these conversations. And I understand it. Most of us that are neurodiverse, we're not very open, and we're not very likely to stand up in front of a crowd and start talking. We may do well on the one-on-one and having that conversation, but we need to encourage more people that are neurodiverse to actually start having these conversations at work, so people can get over these biases that they have towards what is autism or somebody with neurodiversity. Which is kind of a question I wanted to ask everybody. So the portrayal within media of autism and neurodiversity than the number of characters that we're kind of seeing coming out in shows today, because we didn't really see them in shows in the past. So like Sheldon Cooper, The Fabulous Attorney Woo, The Good Doctor, and so on and that forth. Do you guys think those are hurting, or you think they're a good portrayal?
I think
Very good question.
Big Bang
Very
Theory
great
didn't
question.
help, but like there's a show Atypical that I found myself kind of falling in love with.
That was a good one.
It's a Netflix show. I thought that was a very good portrayal. Yeah, I haven't watched you said like Dr. Wu one.
The Fabulous Attorney Woo, and then there's The Good Doctor, right? So
there you go. Mix them both together. Yeah. I haven't seen either of those, so I can't comment. But
Yeah, I've been watching The Good Doctor, and I think I'm not sure if it's a great portrayal, but I think it does increase the awareness a little bit. And although I think you guys are highly functional, and I wouldn't know that you were neurodiverse in any of the conversation. I've had a conversation with you before, Justin, and I had no clue, right? And so I think I would think at least that it helps that there's a little bit more talking about it, but it's not portraying your guy's situation, right? That you are high functioning and have some of you have some issues sometimes with the personal connection, etc. But not at the level as some of those shows are showing, right? And so that's why I think it's more that they're talking about it more, people understanding that this is what it could look like, and then maybe they can see something in someone that's not disclosing. But it helps, I think, for someone that's disclosing it to say, okay, now maybe I can see why some of those small things I've seen and I didn't understand. Now I understand it, and I can relate to it. But I'm not sure that they're representative. They might be representative of people at that level, but it's not any of you guys as far as I can see, at least. So to me, it's more that that is being talked about. I think would make sense, that it helps. But I don't know if you guys think that's the case either.
well, I mean, the nature of things being hidden too, like and the brief moments that you or anybody else might have visibility on us, you don't really get much insight into what our personal lives look like or what our internal lives, or like
Exactly.
our lives within ourselves kind of are. But yeah, my partner was joking about it just like the other day. She's like, yeah, I mean, lots of people can't tell immediately, but if they ever spent any amount of time with you, they'd figure it out, right? Like, yeah, that's true. But masking skills being what they are, I sort of like do that very well. But getting out and like speaking and stuff, I mean, that was like a humongous hurdle for me in the beginning. I mean, I used to want to like pass out, frankly. I mean, it was like really hard
For public speaking.
Yeah.
I kind of like the thrill of it, though. I kind of like the challenge there.
Oh yeah, no, me too. But at first it was frightening. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I can kind of dissociate from it a little bit. The same with like being on camera for vlogging and stuff. It's like everyone kind of had that fear of like being on camera, but I just kind of did it anyways and stuff, and like we're pushed through the uncomfortability, especially like being in camera vlogging in public. Like before COVID, it was not necessarily a popular thing to do. Maybe now it's a little more socialized, which is cool, but that was kind of like how I stood out a little bit earlier on, was like, just vlogging. And I don't know where I was going with that, but like, yeah.
No, but it is really, it's about trying something that you're not comfortable with, that, and especially if you are on the spectrum and trying something where it's something about communication, right? And I've seen the same. I've seen a lot of people, not even on the spectrum, but just that they identify as introvert, and they're very much extrovert now after COVID, because they're doing some all these different things, right? So this COVID thing has really opened up, I think, for a lot of people to try some new things.
Oh, public speaking, yeah.
Yeah, and public speaking. I mean, this whole Clubhouse that started, everybody was on Clubhouse suddenly talking to other people about topics that they would rarely even discuss at work environment or at home, right? It's just there's so many things that have changed the communication space over the last 4 years. That's very, very interesting. Yeah, we're
Everybody's an expert.
yeah, that's right. So we're at time here. I again, I would like to really thank you all for joining here today. It has been a great session today, and it's been great conclusion of the series that Jason started on autism manufacturing. And I hope that both these 5 YouTube videos and 5 LinkedIn sessions are going to be reused. I'm going to share them for sure, and hoping even that we could create a series on YouTube that could be used as a resource as well, because there's a lot of good stuff here. So thanks again. I know Jason, if you want to have a last thought from your perspective, that was conclusion of your
Actually,
series.
I'd like to let Zach, Justin, and Todd each give their last thoughts to close this off, as they're the guests in the final episode.
Zach, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jason. With Empath Consulting, yeah, I love what you're doing, helping advocate for people with autism or people on the spectrum in manufacturing. You know, we could bring a lot of value to the industry. We do bring a lot of value, but sometimes we're just a little misunderstood. So we need that education and awareness. So I love what you're doing. Thank you.
Justin, get it.
I guess I'll go for it. It's on me now. Yeah, Jason, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. You know, a lot of my mission lately has been trying to figure out, you know, ways for folks to gain access and just sort of making space. And this has been another really, really great opportunity, and helps me become even more comfortable just telling my own story, and will hopefully help others tell theirs. So appreciate you.
I guess that leaves me. Yeah, thanks for having me. I think it's the more we can do to raise awareness around all these topics, I think the better off we'll be. So thanks for having me, and it was a pleasure to meet you all and interact with you.
Well, thanks everyone. Again, this was Industry 4.0 Club, our Thursday People, Process, and Culture, and we were having our conclusion to our series on autism manufacturing. And we had some great sessions, 5 sessions in all, 4 one-on-ones, more or less, and then this panel here that has really opened up to both some interesting experiences and some good solutions and good feedback to everybody that are in manufacturing, that are either responsible for hiring, managing, or themselves on the spectrum or neurodiverse. So please go have a look at the other sessions as well, and check out what we have there on the topic here as we conclude this series. Again, if you like having these type of conversation as much as we do, please follow us and join us on our scheduled rooms. We have every day, Monday through Thursday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Central, Monday through Thursday, on topics around Industry 4.0. And you can check our schedule on www.industry40club.com or here on LinkedIn. And with that, thanks everyone again. And we will conclude today. And please follow us and check out the rest of the sessions on this series.